Welcome to the journey. May this space inspire you to ask questions, explore the unknown, and most importantly, to awaken. This is the Library of Awakening.
Welcome back to the Library of Awakening. Today we begin Chapter 1 of The Spiritual Universe by Oswald Murray, a book that explores the idea that reality extends far beyond the physical world, revealing that consciousness, spirit, and unseen forces may form the true foundation of existence. If you're enjoying these reads, do us a favor as we are growing this platform organically. It truly helps when you hit that thumbs up button. And if you're not already subscribed, consider joining us here in the Library of Awakening. We genuinely enjoy having you here, and we deeply appreciate your support on this journey. With that being said, let's begin. All founders of religions, all philosophers and illuminated mystics have been searching for an adequate conception of existence. At last, it is given in a way that reconciles and harmonizes their views, in the form of an exposition of a highly original and most interesting cosmic philosophy, the value and significance of which cannot fail to be recognized by thinkers. This exposition is based on teachings received by a man who has passed away from the earth some years ago, and which he did not publish during his lifetime, because he considered that public opinion was not then ready for their presentation. They were circulated privately among a small group of his personal friends, including the present writer, thus enabling the latter to vouch for his bona fides. Science has, however, added so considerably to human knowledge since then that the public may now be prepared to give its consideration to the contents of this exposition. The difficulty which readers have to face is that it is claimed that these teachings emanate from beings in supernal states, higher states indeed than man has any knowledge of so far. The man in question received these teachings by thought transference from operators who claim to have evolved from the personal state of being into a state in which the personality is transmuted and transcended into a degree of equilibrate, associative, integral being, in which the intensified individual consciousness shares in and is shared in reciprocally by all the selves integrated in the transcendent unity in which they participate. These operators stated that thought is inseparable from life and is inherent in units of life. They were able to transmit a current of life conveying their thoughts to the human receiver used, in whose mental organism these became converted into spoken words, which were recorded by an assistant at the time. This practically constituted inspiration. They had not been able to do this in the past because the life force at their disposal was not then sufficiently powerful for that purpose. But in the course of the evolution of the cosmos, the life power they now receive from anterior sources carries greater potentiality and enabled a beginning to be affected in this process, which will be renewed later on. These operators claim to have been human beings like ourselves. Some of them had lived on this earth and had evolved into the inner, higher states they now occupy in the spiritual spheres associated with our sun, and act from that center in transmitting their thoughts. Some of them stated that they dwelt in the spiritual spheres of a sun which was prior in cosmic order to ours. Some claimed to have cooperated, acting from that center, in the condensing and evolving of our sun and solar system from the diffuse ethereal life occupying space, acting as artificers delegated to that work by the Supreme. Consequently, their teachings are based on their experience. These teachers present the one infinite life of the infinite self as the basis of all being. All manifestation and becoming is determined by the wisdom, love, and power of the infinite self, who uses his finite but transcendent selves as his artificers, when determining his infinite life into finite manifestations. Some speculative thinkers are now postulating life in its essential state as the universal basis of being, But the prominent novelty of this exposition lies in the fact that the one infinite life is stated to be a dual unity in its constitution, which gives rise to remarkable features. Thus it is stated that while life is ethereal but substantial in itself, it carries consciousness inherently. Consequently, life underlies and is the substratum of consciousness. Consciousness never exists except in the presence of life. When life indrawns, consciousness ceases. Where life exists, consciousness functions in various degrees. On the other hand, its dual unity comprises both self and not-self. Modern thinkers are recognizing that both self and not-self are necessary cooperators in self-consciousness. Hegel said, "Self-consciousness implies consciousness of something else than self, and could not exist without it. With the not-self, the self also would disappear." The not-self referred to here is the percept, or object of knowledge. The same law exists precedentially in life itself, in which consciousness is inherent. The dual unity of the infinite life includes the dual components of self and of not-self. Itself is the infinite self whose life it is, and who is prior in spiritual order to all differentiation and manifestation. The life of the infinite self is also immanent in all his finite selves. But there is a portion of the infinite life in which self-consciousness has not yet been unfolded, but which life is comprised in the cognition and in the unity of the infinite self, whose self-consciousness permeates it. This is illustrated in the lower field of our finite self, which comprises the non-self-conscious life in the matter integrated in our organism, in its cognition and in its unity, while its self-consciousness permeates it. These dual components of the infinite life become unified in all finite selves, as they are precedentially in the infinite self. Another important feature of the dual unity of life is disclosed in the statement that life is electromagnetic, these two forces being the two poles of the same life force. This definition is most important. Electricity is the positive element and magnetism the negative. This is in accord with the most recent postulates of science, which claim that space is occupied by ether or electricity, and that all the fabric of the universe can be conceived as built up of the interactions of units of positive electricity or protons with units of negative electricity or electrons. This exposition claims that all space is occupied by units of electromagnetic life, carrying dual polarity, or electricity and magnetism. So the two positions approach each other, but science has not yet identified ether with life in its essential and non-self-conscious state. These two forces of electricity and magnetism are to the non-self-conscious life and to the physical universe which is condensed therefrom, what the two sexes are to each other in self-conscious life. This divulges that the dual unity of life comprises positive and negative principles in its non-self-conscious component, which disclose themselves in self-conscious life to be masculine and feminine natures. These are present in its every unit prior to differentiation, and consequently in its integral unity. It is the operation of these two forces of electricity and magnetism that by their interaction produce our surroundings in the domain of nature, as science is now tending to recognize. But these forces in that field belong to the non-self-conscious domain of life. Therefore, they are used by self-conscious operators. It is also by the interaction of these two forces on a higher level that self-consciousness emerges in man. The electricity and magnetism that we know in nature and that we utilize in our service belong to the non-self-conscious domain of life. Whereas the electricity and magnetism that induce self-conscious reactions in man pertain to the life process of the infinite self, which flows permanently through all his finite selves, who are fractions of his life. Similarly, on a lower level, the life of the finite selves flows permanently through every unit cell in their organisms. This life also carries electricity and magnetism, or dual polarity, as the non-self-conscious life does. What we call matter consists of some of the non-self-conscious component of the infinite life, which has been transformed down to its lowest and most condensed degree by the artificers of the Supreme in order to constitute the physical field of the cosmos, in which his finite selves may unfold their self-consciousness and acquire experience. But this matter does not remain in that state forever. It is ever being changed in its form and becomes transmuted up again in its stage and re-etherealized in the course of time by being integrated in the physical forms of finite selves, thus coming under the radiated influence of the finite selves within their outer forms, which finite selves are fractions of the life of the infinite self immanent in man. The non-self-conscious life in matter then absorbs some of the qualities of the self, in whose outer form it is integrated, and thereby evolves in its stage. These units of life then ascend into integration in the outer forms of spirits in consecutively higher states, and thus become etherealized. Thus, the infinite self acts upon his non-self-conscious life through the intermediary of his finite selves, and gradually evolves it. This involves a permanent process of descent of the non-self life from ethereal states into states of density, and a subsequent reascent in inverse order. This process applies both in the domain of self and of not-self. It applies precedentially to finite selves, whose becoming is effected in this manner. So it is by the interaction of self with non-self-conscious life that the becoming of both finite selves and of non-self-conscious life is effected. The fact that every unit of the life of the infinite self, issuing from his self-conscious central fount, comprises both masculine and feminine natures, gives rise to a surprising result. After being differentiated in consciousness, these dual poles or natures of the units become segmented before being outbirthed separately on the outer earth as finite selves, and thus give rise to two distinct personalities, the one being masculine, the other feminine. This division of the real self into two personalities, the one being masculine, the other feminine, or the one representing the positive element and the other the negative, is reflected in outer nature, in the field of conflicting opposing forces. These temporarily divided poles of the real self meet again when ascended into a much higher state of being and reunite and coalesce in the form of one equilibrate dual self. This may be said to be the arcanum of this system, which reconciles this non-equilibrate personal existence here by exhibiting its relation to the equilibrate states of which it is the necessary foundation. The information presented here goes to show that the infinite life comprises all elements and principles necessary for the production of the universe and all that it includes, under the determinations of the infinite self whose life it is. It shows that all finite manifestations of life are the outworking of the one infinite self, in and by means of his infinite life, under the laws of his wisdom, love, and power. It presents, therefore, an adequate conception of existence. Some readers may possibly be disinclined to accept what has been claimed with regard to the source of origin of these teachings, unsupported as it is by any confirmatory evidence. Such readers may waive the affirmative form of the exposition and take it on its intrinsic merits solely as a contribution to speculative philosophy. As such, it will be found that however strange some of the parts may appear at first sight when taken singly, yet they all cohere in an orderly and fascinating whole. The name of the man who received these teachings is kept in the background, in accord with the instructions of the teachers, who stipulated that, as they come from an altitude where personal being has been transmuted and transcended, no personal element is to be associated with them here. Their recognition must come from within the human soul itself, independently of external personal contribution, or not at all. These teachings show that the world process is the manifestation of the infinite and eternal self, acting through the finite and temporal. They bring us information with regard to our future becoming. They show that our life here is but a stepping stone or a stage in a consecutive process of ascent into higher states than we have dreamt of. They throw a flood of light on the value and meaning of human life here, showing that this cannot be estimated from our experience in this outer world solely. They open a horizon of hope to the human mind, such as has never yet been presented to it. The most intricate aspects of this exposition have been left to the last, in Part 3, though in their logical order they should have come first. Readers who are interested in first principles may prefer to read that part first. Chapter 1. The condensation of our solar system and the origin of matter. Our solar system was condensed, we are told, from the diffuse, non-self-conscious, ethereal yet substantial life occupying space by the energies of a host of transcendent but finite operators who were delegated by the Supreme to do that work. These operators dwelt in the spiritual spheres of a solar system which was prior to ours in cosmic order. In the supernal state they occupied, they were in permanent receipt of a current of life from their own source of being. This current was electromagnetic in its constitution and generated a radiant energy in them, enabling them to bring their life force to bear at an immense distance. The ethereal life in space, which science speaks of as ether, on which they acted, is also electromagnetic, so the whole process was electromagnetic. The operators focused their radiated energies on a given center in space, and by these means gradually transformed the units of life floating in that region of space down into a more densified degree, causing them to cohere into the production of a nucleus. Magnetic attraction was then brought into action by the operators, and this nucleus was thus made to attract more units of ambient life. This work required the participation of myriads of artificers and ages of duration to accomplish. It is to be observed that the whole work was the expression of pre-existing intelligence, acting in finite but transcendent selves, who themselves were giving expression to the determinations of the infinite self, conveyed to them by the life current of the infinite self, ever being mediated to them. The action thus engendered was brought to bear on the non-self-conscious component of the infinite life of the infinite self. So it was the result of the interaction of self-conscious life upon and with non-self-conscious life, both being components of the dual unity of the life of the infinite self. It is also to be observed that the infinite self does not act immediately in producing finite manifestations, but mediately, through his own finite selves, in whom a fraction of his life is immanent, and through whom his life process ever flows. These supernal operators originated, as all finite selves do, in units of the self-conscious life of the infinite self. These were propelled into incarnation in the personal state on an Earth belonging to a solar system prior to ours in cosmic order, where their self-consciousness was unfolded and developed. They then ascended through the intermediate states of being in that system and became integral units in the solar self of that system, sharing reciprocally in the consciousness of all the other units in that transcendent unity. Subsequently, they were called upon to participate in the work of calling a new solar system, that is, this one, into existence, as already described. This throws light on our future destiny, as we also pass through a similar process of becoming. Having traced the origin of these operators, we will now return to their work, which we have followed to the stage of the production of a nebula. A similar process, but in more external degree, was then brought to bear upon this nebula, leading to the production from it of a more densified substance, which was again further condensed into matter and concentrated into planets. All this was effected by bringing their transmitted electromagnetic energies to bear upon the polarity of the units of non-self-conscious life integrated in the nebula. Thus, matter is produced from non-self-conscious life, densified so as to be made objective to the senses of the human beings who were to follow when the field had been prepared for them. All this was done, it will be noticed, by the power of pre-existing intelligence, instead of intelligence being produced by matter, as is often supposed to be the case. But the Earth having been produced, its evolution would have become stationary and ceased if the action upon it of the operators had been suspended. Evolution required, and still requires, and ever will do so, the involution of directive ideas as its precondition. Consequently, their directive ideas continued to be conveyed to the Earth in their radiated life by these great operators. These ideas, transmitted in a positive life current, were involved in the negative, receptive world soul, which, reacting thereto, generated evolutionary phenomena in accord with the thought content implanted primarily in the world soul and subsequently in the living forms already produced. These ideas, step by step and grade by grade, each being in advance of what had preceded, were ultimated in organic forms with power to procreate and to continue their own species. The most perfect of these forms we now witness in our environment. It will be realized from this that in this system, the involution of directive ideas in a vehicle of life is the precondition and cause of evolution. It will be seen later that these great operators are dual beings. Their thoughts are then comprised in a vehicle of life, or are living ideas. This difference in being explains the power of such ideas as compared with the thoughts of personal, segmented selves, such as we are at present. That concludes the introduction and Chapter 1 of the Spiritual Universe. What you've just explored is the beginning of understanding that the visible world may only be a small part of a far greater spiritual reality. The journey inward is the journey toward truth, awareness, and higher understanding. Smash that thumbs up button, subscribe, and join us as we continue unlocking deeper knowledge here in the Library of Awakening.
I know some of the perspectives that I share may be as challenging for you as they once were for me. But isn't that the beauty of exploration? Every perspective, no matter how unconventional, has something valuable to contribute to it if it's shared. Knowledge is not absolute. It's a living, breathing phenomena, shaped and reshaped over time. The important thing is not always be right, but to always be curious. Explore freely, share boldly, and learn deeply. And don't rely solely on others to validate your discoveries. Stand firm in integrity, even in the face of criticism. Remember that growth always means embracing the humility to admit when we're wrong. Learning from our errors is not a setback, it's the very essence of our progress. So, welcome to the journey. May this space inspire you to ask questions, explore the unknown, and most importantly, to awaken. This is the Library of Awakening.